Arsenal won, Bayer Leverkusen won. Couple different ways you could choose to look at the result. It was far from our best performance of this season. We lacked an attack, couldn't really find that first gear. But there's two legs for a reason. 1-1 on aggregate. You're going back to the Emirates on level ground. It's not the worst situation in the world for Arsenal. Was it a concerning performance in a competition that we had won our last 8 matches in? Sure. Like we've talked about in the past, at this stage of the season, you really only care about results. And if you put some perspective behind the draw, I think you would much rather be going back to the Emirates at 1-1 rather than 1-0. We'll talk about the performance though, and we'll also talk about what to expect in the second leg coming up this week. This is the American Gooner. Welcome in to another episode of the American Gooner Podcast. Before we get started talking about this 1-1 draw between Arsenal and Bayer Leverkusen, if you could please like the video, subscribe, leave your comments down below. I appreciate everybody that's been giving feedback so far and giving the channel support as we look to grow it in this amazing season that we're all experiencing. So I appreciate the support. If you could like the video, subscribe, greatly appreciated. And if you're listening on Spotify, thank you very much as well. Follow, post notifications, whatever it is. If you want to hear more Arsenal talk, all of it greatly appreciated. But now let's get into the match. 1-1 draw in the first leg of our Champions League round of 16 against Bayer Leverkusen. Overall thoughts on the performance. I don't think that it was as bad as it's being made out to be. What I think is that the expectations were and are still very high on this team after going not only unbeaten, but 8 for 8 wins from 8 matches in the group stage of the Champions League, looking like the runaway favorites, especially now seeing the side of the draw that they ended up on, looking at their performance in the Champions League, in the FA Cup, in the Carabao Cup. The expectation is, especially when you're performing as efficiently as Arsenal are in all 4 of the competitions that they're playing in, that you go into the first leg of a match like that against Bayer Leverkusen and you win. And it's certainly disappointing not to have won, but you have to put context into a match like this. We were trailing for the majority of the second half. We were beaten at our own game, which was salt being rubbed into the wound of what I believed was going to be a 1-0 loss. That the goal that we conceded came from a corner, which has been our specialty all year long. We don't often get beat from corners. We usually beat our opponents from corners. But in a match where for 40 minutes it felt like we were going to be going into the second leg trailing, to find the equalizer and to be going back to the Emirates where we've lost 1 match in the last year, we've conceded only a handful of goals across all competitions. I'm not really that worried about the performance in the first leg, knowing now the context that we were able to salvage a draw out of a match where we were not at our best. And we have a really good opportunity to build on a 1-1 aggregate score back at the Emirates where we've been flawless for the last 365 plus days. But all the chatter that came out of that result, categorizing that as one of the worst performances of the season, a big letdown, a big disappointment for this Arsenal team, I don't necessarily agree with that categorization. We had the majority of the possession at 55%. We won on XG. And if you look at the momentum, we actually controlled the majority of the game outside of that one little moment where Leverkusen ended up scoring from the corner. And credit to them, it was a well-taken corner. It was not well defended, but it was a well-taken corner. I think they deserved to get the goal just based on how they aligned for that set piece. I don't think we necessarily deserved to concede based on how the flow of the game had gone in the first half. But if you look at the momentum, we actually did a really good job of regrouping after conceding that goal. If you look at just the second half, we had 54% possession. We beat them on XG. We had 2 big chances to their 1. We outpassed them by about 30, and we generated more corners. So, I think the numbers will support this idea that it probably wasn't our worst performance of the season. I actually felt just watching that second half like we were the much better team. You could consider us lucky that Madueke draws that pen and, we're kind of gifted the equalizer at the very end of the match, but I don't feel as though we didn't deserve to go back to the Emirates at the very least level on aggregate. I think the feeling of that being such a quote unquote poor performance stems from the expectation that we all had for this team. Unbeaten in the group stage, and some of those matches that Arsenal won were in extremely tough environments for any team, especially one that we all consider to be pretty mentally volatile. They've proven so far that they can really step onto any ground and feel comfortable playing their style, taking it to whichever opponent it may be, and collecting 3 points. So yeah, favorable draw against Leverkusen as now the runaway favorites to go and win the entire competition. The expectation from most, if not all, was probably a win. That being said, I'm choosing to look at the result rather than the performance because Arsenal have put themselves in the best position possible given the circumstances of conceding a goal from a corner to start the second half away from home. They found the late equalizer, and all they have to do now is win at the Emirates, which is something that they are more than comfortable doing. Now, a big part of that result was Madueke drawing the pen, which, of course, comes with a healthy dose of controversy, which is unfortunate because we've reached a point in modern football, especially in the Prem, but also in Europe as well, where these things just aren't clear-cut anymore. There's such a gray area that exists around what type of contact and what level of contact constitutes a pen. And then that gray area around what is or is not a pen gets amplified by the fact that there are dozens of different camera angles capturing very different perspectives of what actually happened. So the result is people finding the specific angle that best supports their opinion and using that to fuel the fire of this should be or this should not be a pen. Or I guess a better way to put that is VAR got it right or VAR got it wrong. And I'm guilty of that too, especially in this instance. There's an angle where Madueke's left foot is trapped under the defender, and to me, that has been the most clear-cut form of evidence that VAR got this decision correct. But in fairness, I've seen people posting different angles on Twitter that make it look like Madueke wasn't even touched. My thinking has always been that if VAR steps in, the correct decision is going to be made. The on-field referees get things wrong all the time with how fast-paced the game is nowadays, with how much they have to look at and be cognizant of. They get things wrong, and that's part of it. We've seen so many penalties overturned since the introduction of VAR, so it's not anything new that the on-field decision is questionable, and then VAR looks at it and either confirms or reverses it. If this was the early stages of the FA Cup and there was no VAR, then I would at least understand why there's controversy. What I can't wrap my head around is that the on-field decision was made, VAR looked at it, they looked at all the angles that have been circulating online simultaneously, clearly found one or two that supported the on-field decision and confirmed it. That should be end of story. There shouldn't be people saying Arsenal got bailed out by VAR and this was the incorrect decision and they should have lost. They looked at it, they saw something that, with beyond a shadow of a doubt, confirmed the call for them, and that's that. Now, were we lucky to have been given a pen at that stage of the game? Absolutely. Our performance in the second half and our response to conceding was good, but we still hadn't scored to draw level. It was looking like it was going to go the way of a loss. So I feel like we were lucky in the context of we were probably going to lose that match. We were generating some sort of pressure towards the end there. You can't say with certainty whether it was going to result in a goal or not, but you have to give credit to Madueke. He did a good job beating the defender, creating what looked like a threatening scoring chance. Who knows if maybe even if he isn't taken down there, he goes on to score, or he goes on to create another chance, another corner, whatever it may be. So you can't say with certainty what would have happened after that moment had he not been fouled. But I wouldn't say we were undeserving of the draw and of the receipt of the penalty so late in the game, but we were definitely just lucky given the circumstances. In my opinion, though, and it's absolutely a biased opinion, I think it was a pen. I would also like to think that if a Leverkusen attacking player had that positioning in the box and Nkapie or Gabriel or whoever took them down in that manner, that we would be conceding a penalty. Thinking about it from that point of view affirms for me that the call was correct, because if it had happened to us and they didn't award a penalty, I think we would all be saying we're really lucky to have not have conceded there. In terms of the second leg, though, Arsenal still very much in control. Like I said, it's 1-1 on aggregate. They play two legs for a reason. We're going back to the Emirates where we've been, for the most part, unbeatable. My confidence level is still very much high. I know everybody wanted to be ahead going back to London. I'm not going to say that that doesn't suit this Arsenal team, but I'm actually okay with them still needing to prove something in this second leg. I'll draw back on the Carabao Cup tie with Chelsea. When we played the first leg at Stamford Bridge, we had a very convincing performance. We had the lead going back into the second leg at home. We had a pretty dodgy performance at the Emirates. It was a 1-0 victory, but the majority of the match was spent just absorbing this enormous pressure from Chelsea. There were countless moments where we looked extremely weak, and we were sitting back and just taking this pressure. It was very similar to the Brighton game that we just played, where we looked like we were content defending for 90 plus minutes. And that's been a theme with Arsenal this season that isn't a very positive theme, where if we're facing a lot of pressure or a pretty heavy counterattack, it feels like we're waiting to concede before we find that next gear in our own attack. And that Carabao Cup tie with Chelsea felt like that. Like they were going to throw everything they had at us. We would defend to the best of our ability, but if we were somehow opened up or we somehow conceded, then we would start to play the game. So while I obviously would have preferred a win in the first leg against Leverkusen, part of me is actually satisfied knowing that we have to continue to bring our best in the Champions League. You know, there were talks of potential squad rotation if we'd won the first leg by 2 or 3 goals. And again, while a win in the first leg would have been great, I could easily envision a scenario where we go back to the Emirates with what we feel is a comfortable lead. We rotate the squad heavily. We kind of play on our heels a little bit. Leverkusen plays on the front foot, really takes it to us, and makes something of a game out of it. I don't think in this competition in particular, you can afford to be playing like that. FA Cup against Mansfield, Carabao Cup against Chelsea, whatever. Champions League football, though, you need to find your best game, especially at the stage we're at right now. So if you're an Arsenal fan that's a little bit on edge and panicked about how the first leg looked and the fact that we weren't able to pull ahead on aggregate, I would remind you that we've put ourselves in a position where we need to play our best at home. And that's what you want in the Champions League, is to be forced into your best form. There's only been a couple times this season where we've gone into a match level, and losing that match meant the end of our run in that competition. We are now at that point going into the second leg against Leverkusen, and I see it as a great opportunity, especially with the Premier League title race heating up, with the Carabao Cup final a week and a half away, and the FA Cup draw looking like it's going to fall our way once again, I see this as a prime opportunity to showcase what we are made of in must-win matches. If Arsenal want to win the Premier League title, they're pretty much going to have to win the rest of their matches. If they want to win the Carabao Cup, they're going to have to go into Wembley and beat Man City. Same thing with the FA Cup. And we're at that point now where if they want to win the Champions League, which they're favored to do and they're expected to do, they're going to have to win pressure matches like this second leg against Leverkusen. And I'm confident they're going to do it. And lastly, before we sign off, I'm going to give my predictions for the remaining fixtures in the Champions League round of 16. The first legs of all the matches were played this past week. I'm going to run through all the matches and give a quick hit prediction for which team I believe is going to advance in the second leg and move on to the quarterfinal. PSG-Chelsea, I didn't think that PSG were going to go out this early anyways. They're up 5-2 on aggregate now, which pretty much solidifies their place in the quarterfinal. I'm going to send them through in the second leg. Galatasaray and Liverpool, one of the more shocking results of the past week. Galatasaray up 1-0 on aggregate. I do think that Liverpool are going to come back in the second leg. I'm going to send them through to the quarterfinal. Real Madrid and City. As an Arsenal fan, I wanted City to keep progressing through the Champions League draw. Not just from a physical fatigue standpoint, but from a focus standpoint. If they're out of the Champions League this early, pretty much all of their attention is going to turn to the Premier League, which does not benefit us in any way, shape, or form. That being said, they're down 3-0 on aggregate right now. That, to me, is an insurmountable lead, especially for a very strong Real Madrid team. So I think Real Madrid are going to progress to the quarterfinal. You can also send Bayern through to the quarterfinal over Atalanta. They're up 6-1 on aggregate right now. I don't think they're going to lose that lead. Newcastle and Barcelona. I'd say Newcastle were probably the most impressive looking Premier League side in the Champions League round of 16 so far. 1-1 on aggregate, though. I think Barcelona is just the much stronger team, so I'm going to send them through. Atletico over Spurs. They're up 5-2 on aggregate right now. Bodo over Sporting. They're up 3-0 on aggregate. And then Arsenal, Bayer Leverkusen. Obviously, Arsenal advanced to the quarterfinal. 1-1 on aggregate right now. But I think back at the Emirates, we're going to get the job done. And I'll leave you all with that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the American Gooner. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, or follow if you're listening on Spotify. We will be back tomorrow. Premier League reaction. Arsenal, Everton, fingers crossed, hoping for the best. But regardless, we'll be back with a match reaction podcast following the full-time whistle. Until then, come on, you Gunners.